I'm named after my great-great-grandfather, Sven Larsson. And Sven Larsson was a farmer's boy in the south of Sweden almost 200 years ago. And he was hanging out there in the south, and he was harvesting his beets, and he was stacking his hay. And he thought to himself, I hate farming. This sucks. So he was thinking, I'm out of here. But he was the oldest son, so he was expected to take over the farm. So he had to sneak down to the harbor at the age of 15, find a ship, found himself a job, and he took to sea. And he didn't know if he would ever see his family again. So Sven came back 20 years later, and then he was a captain. And he had a ship called Selma. And I have a picture of Selma on my nightstand back home, because it reminds me of my connection to Sven and his adventures. And maybe he lives in me, I think so, because I like to explore too. And my parents always say that when me and my sister, when we were kids, we would always run around in the forest, but I would be the one who would run away, and I wouldn't come back until I'd find something interesting in the forest. Like a rock that I was certain was gold, or a dead animal, or something. And most of the land today in the world is already explored. But luckily, as my friend Anita says, we are infinitely deep. So the soul is becoming my sea. And it started 5 years ago. So I was lying in bed and I was 21, and I was looking into the ceiling, feeling like crap, in the middle of a crisis, because the UN climate negotiations were failing, and I was responsible. Or at least that's what I thought. Because I dropped out of med school 1 year earlier to fix climate change. And I couldn't do it. And as it turns out, fixing climate change is a really hard thing to do on your own. In 1 year. When you're 21. But that's how I felt. And I was lying there and I was thinking, if I'm not happy, I'm not going to help a soul. I have to figure out what makes me happy. So I look back in time, and I look at the times in my life when I've been the most happy. And I found a pattern. And I wrote myself a recipe. And I followed it. And it didn't only help me get back to normal, I actually started to feel better than ever. So I was thinking, there's something to this. And since then, I've been wondering, do other people have recipes like this? Is there even a universal recipe for happiness? If there is, I want to figure it out. And as a sane, normal person would probably just go get a book and read about happiness. But I felt a strong urge to get out in the forest and not come back until I find something interesting. And my great-great-grandfather, Sven, he used this tool to explore the world. And I'd use something similar, this camera. I decided to go around the world and talk to as many people as I could, and record those conversations, talk about what made these people happy, talk about happiness, and their recipes. And I was wondering, is there a universal recipe for happiness? And if there is, what does it look like? And before I talk about the trip, let me just say a few words about happiness first. The WHO has a definition of health that's pretty interesting. And it goes like this. Health is a state of complete physical, social, and mental well-being. A state of complete physical, social, and mental well-being. Who ever feels like that for more than 30 seconds in a row, once in a while? That's not happiness. That's not health, even. If you feel like that, complete physical, social, and mental well-being, you're having an orgasm. That's it. Instead, I met a woman on my trip that had a really nice metaphor for happiness that I like. She said, happiness is a long-term mood that kind of feels like going slightly downhill on a bike. You don't have to pedal like crazy to get somewhere. And if you have problems, you can just, with small movements, make kind of large turns. Stay away from slugs and rocks in the road. So I started my trip, and I ended up in San Francisco. And if you were wondering who this guy was, it's called Oscar. That's the guy that I met in San Francisco. And we talked about happiness. And he stressed the importance of play. He plays a lot. wakes up in the morning early to catch a few waves. He's making videos together with his friends. He's playing the guitar. And in our culture, we're not supposed to play when we grow up. We're supposed to be serious. But the happiest people that I met on the trip, they were all playing, no matter how old they were. And Karl-Oskar said something that I really remember. He said, most of life consists of everydays. And if we're not making the best of those everydays, we'll have wasted our lives away waiting for highlights. So playing every day, that was his motto. And I took that ingredient and I wrote it down. A month later, I was hanging out with this guy, Samdu, from Bhutan. And we were talking about passion and purpose. And at this point of my trip, I was really frustrated because I'd met so many people, especially young people out there, who hadn't found their passion and purpose yet. And they didn't even dare to think about it. So I was worried and I was wondering why this was. And I met a 20-year-old guy on a bus who kind of put the finger on it. And he said, I think it's really scary to think about your passion and purpose because we're afraid of what we might find. We might figure out that our lives suck and that we're not living the lives that we want to. And I think it's onto something big, because when we dare to dream, when we dare to embrace the dream and tell other people about it, suddenly we're at the risk of failing. And that's not okay in our culture. That's something we need to change. So I was frustrated and I was talking to Samdu about this, and he said, yeah, I agree. Do you know what I do to get over that fear and start to connect to my purpose? And I said, no, please tell me, what is it? And he said, I think about my 80th birthday. And I think about what we're eating, and I think about what I'm wearing, and what people I have invited. And I imagine these people giving me speeches. They're telling me, have I loved? Have I lived? Have I contributed? What am I leaving behind? And I think Samdu's point is that in connection with our own death, at the end of our lives, we truly learn how to live. And I think that's really important too. And if we succeed in building that purposeful vision, meaningful vision of what we want to do with our lives, then we'll have the privilege of waking up every morning with a sense of direction and new energy. So, purpose was the next building block or ingredient. Later on, I went to Wellington, New Zealand, and I was hanging out with Heather. And Heather really inspired me because she has built her life around helping other people. She's a nurse, so every day she's treating cancer patients. But she's also chosen to live and invest in a community that is using sort of collaborative thing where one neighbor is mowing everyone's lawns, another neighbor is growing enough tomatoes for everyone else, and Heather, she's offering free lessons in laughter yoga. And I think Heather makes it painfully obvious that we live in a culture that is self-centered. Just 1 hour away from where we are right now, we find the city of Stockholm. And there's no city in the world with more single households per capita. It's the loneliest city in the world. And loneliness is toxic to the soul. And I think we're meant to live together, and I think we're meant to help each other out. So, finally I came to Rwanda in Africa. And Rwanda is a country that has been torn apart by genocide only 19 years ago. And it's a fantastic place to go look for happiness, by the way. And I met this guy, Emmanuel Harariman, or Emmy. And Emmy was only 8 years old when the genocide hit Rwanda. So he had to flee into the jungle together with his family, together with his village. And they built shelters in the trees, and they had to follow the mountain gorillas. This is crazy. They followed the mountain gorillas to see what they ate, and they tried to eat the same plants, and they survived. They were staying in the jungle for 2 years because they didn't know the genocide was over. How could they? So the gorilla saved his life, and now Emmy is working as a guide, gorilla guide in a national park. And we were hanging out, and it was really difficult to get Emmy to talk about himself. He wanted to talk about himself as parts of something else. Part of his family, part of his village, part of the jungle. And he let me stay in his clay house, and I was lying there that night, and I realized that my perception of connection had been too narrow. Emmy taught me that connection comes in many flavors and in many dimensions. Love and connection to ourselves, connection to each other, connection to nature, to gods if we have any, a connection to those who have been. The more connected we are, the less lonely we feel. So I was doing this trip and I found 15 building blocks like these. And at the end of the trip, and I was looking at all my boxes, and I didn't do my boxes, and I was thinking, God, it takes a lot of work to be happy, doesn't it? And I think so, especially in our culture. Because as I said, I think we live in a self-centered, stressful, lonely culture. And we have sort of disconnected ourselves from all the good stuff in our daily lives, working 50 hours a week. So I was like, okay, what do we do about this? What do we do about the information of how the happy people live? Well, I suggest, I'm going to answer the question first. I went out with the question, is there a universal recipe for happiness? I think there is, but I think it has to be tailored individually for it to work, really. So that's the first thing we can do. We can design our own happiness recipe. I'm going to take a few fast ones here. I'm going to take health. That keeps coming up. And gratitude, practicing gratitude. And what we can do is to think creatively about how to design our lives in a way that we get the things we need without spending too much energy. And remember that we are not in charge of our lives most of the time. We have an autopilot who's in charge. We act in patterns. We do what we always do. Like when we wake up in the morning or when we get back from work. We don't think about what we do. And the beautiful thing about this is that it saves us energy. And when our rituals are disrupted, we get annoyed. Like, for example, when you go to work and you're listening to your iPod or your phone, and you usually listen to music, and then the battery dies, and you're like, now I have to think about something else to think about. So our ritual saves us energy. And the good thing is that we can choose what rituals we want to have in our lives. We can choose what social context we want to be part of. And so this is the main point of my talk. We can make smart decisions about what social contexts and what rituals we have in our lives that can give us this stuff for free. And on the trip, I saw several beautiful examples of this. In San Francisco, Carl Oscar, who was sitting on the tram into downtown San Fran every day, and he was thinking about the people that he loves, one by one. What do they need? What are they up to? How do they feel right now? He was kind of appreciating their existence every day. Without thinking about it, he gave himself a daily dose of connection and of gratitude. In Wellington, Heather loves to play music, so she's jamming with her friends several times a week. But they're not jamming inside their house. They're jamming out on the porch. Why? So that other people walking by can enjoy the music. So Heather has built herself a social context, living with her friends, and a ritual playing on the porch that gives her constant access to connection, to play, to helping other people. And I think it's brilliant. And the examples are endless. They don't have to spend energy being happy. It's happiness for lazy people. And I don't know what my great-great-grandfather Sven Larsen would say about all this. He probably would say, dude, you got way too much free time. Or he might have been happy and proud. But if he was here with me now on this stage, closing this talk, maybe he would have reminded us that whatever we spend our lives doing when we walk out of these doors, we might just end up as pictures on the nightstand of our great-great-grandchildren and inspire them to do something really exciting. Thanks. Tack.